Addiction has dominated my life for the last 4 years in ways I never fully understood until recently. What I've come to realize is that addiction isn't just destructive in obvious ways, it carries a deeper hidden cost that affects everything from relationships to finances, and especially for those of us with BPD, there's quite a lot to unpack. Today we're focusing on the impact of addiction on relationships and finances. Now this is part one, and in part two we'll dive into how addiction connects to BPD and how I've worked to overcome it. But before we jump in, I'd love to hear your experiences with addiction, whether you've gone through it yourself or witnessed it in someone close to you. I think sharing our stories can kind of help us understand it more and connect on a level that I kind of like, you know. So drop a comment and let's start up a conversation. And hey, I'm Nico. If you enjoy content like this, make sure to subscribe and leave a like it really helps. And I really do appreciate the support on the last video. That was really important to me. So let's start with relationships. Now, addiction has a massive impact on them, and sometimes we don't even realize it, just how insidious it can be. Trust, for example, addiction makes it nearly impossible to maintain trust, I've found. And it comes in forms of like hiding it and lying about where I'm spending my money, stuff like that, or even breaking promises. I definitely have said I wanted to quit for a long time and like failed to deliver so many times that it kind of got to a point where people were like, yeah, sure. And breaking that trust over and over again kind of sucks, you know, especially personally. I definitely felt a lot of shame from that, not being able to quit and trying over and over again and just failing. I also think it kind of creates like this emotional distance. Like addiction consumes so much of your mental and physical energy that you kind of end up disconnected. I know that I wasn't like emotionally present a lot of the time, especially if I was just fiending for a cigarette. Like I wasn't really thinking about my surroundings or the people around me. And I don't think I understood just how much of a difference it makes being completely sober until now. Like it's astounding how much more present and how much more available I am, if that makes sense. And you're kind of losing yourself to your addiction, and it sucks for the people around you to not even be able to help in many cases. I think for me especially, people would always be incredibly supportive, but it gets to a point where like how supportive can people be if you keep failing, you know? Conflict wasn't really something I had to deal with, but I could imagine it being a part of the problem, especially like that irritability and stuff like that, the mood swings that comes with being an addict, and that downward spiral. Depending on what it is, of course, like I guess I was fortunate that I was only addicted to cigarettes, but if it was worse than that, I don't want to think about that, to be honest. A different aspect is definitely all the missed memories. I feel like you kind of neglect the people around you when you choose your addiction over like creating more memories. I think I've lost a lot of memories, so to speak. Like I've definitely missed key moments just because I was not able to go or whatever it might be due to finances being a part of it too, you know? Finances, for example, was definitely strained quite a bit. When I was not working, like addiction was kind of eating up like 2/3 of my budget most of the time. And it didn't really leave room for much experiences to be had, if I'm being quite honest, and it sucks. From the beginning of 2021 was when I started, and a bit before that, but in that time, that money I had spent could have been 20 grand if it had been invested in the S&P 500, and that's quite a bit, you know? It's quite a lot to miss out on, and it led to a lot of financial stress, and I can't understate how much financial stress just like fills in your day-to-day life. Like there have been so many times where I was just completely mentally detached from what was going around me with the sole purpose of maintaining my addiction financially, and that meant flipping stuff, doing whatever it took to make some extra cash to just buy cigarettes, and that is such a shitty thing to have to deal with, but that's how it goes, you know? And like the guilt and shame that comes from being in such a shitty financial position, and just overall the guilt and shame that comes from being an addict, is definitely what's kept me addicted for longer, I would say. Like in my case, I would isolate myself even more than the typical like solace. And it really became a problem, I would say. It was this vicious cycle of feeling guilty, pulling away, feeding into my addiction even more to cope with that. And then you even feel worse just going down that spiral. And I can't understate enough how much addiction just sucks being in. And like, especially from the outside, like my partner's been really transparent, luckily. She would always check up and be like, hey, is it okay right now? Or is it bad? And I kind of used it to maintain my BPD in a way. Like addiction wasn't like all bad, and that's part of the problem too. You kind of get into this spiral of it being a way to maintain your day-to-day life, as quitting will like result in so much stress, and especially if you have BPD like I do, quitting is just way more difficult. And that's not to say, oh, poor me, not like that, but I used my addiction to cope with my BPD, and it has kind of led to it becoming worse in many aspects. I think my mood swings were way more unpredictable just due to that. And that sucks, you know. And as I've quit, I've noticed a lot of change in that aspect. Like my mood swings are not the same, if I'm being quite frank, and that's a great difference, you know. And even for the people around me who just looking at me kind of fall over and over and succumbing to cigarettes like I did was incredibly hard on them too. Like there's something about like seeing someone struggling, just not being able to help, that definitely causes strain on these relationships. And especially for my siblings, I know it wasn't easy for them at all. And I think to make a point, to make the most important point, addiction kind of leads you down a road where you do stuff you absolutely wouldn't do if you weren't addicted. And I feel, and I regret saying this, but I was definitely a worse person being an addict, even though I thought it was the only way to upkeep my life. I initially had like this dependence on it to maintain my life, and now I want to get into why I got addicted in the first place, but that's for part 2, so stick around for that, because it has a lot to do with BPD. Time is another aspect. I've lost so much time just doing the same thing, like smoking a cigarette. It seems fine, like it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes if you smoke 2. But when you're doing that like every hour of every day, besides sleeping, it adds up. I feel like I have way more time on my hands now, and it's a relief. Like I feel like I have much more time to do what I need to do. And even though cigarettes were a way for me to escape my responsibilities in a way, I've kind of welcomed that aspect of, oh, I kind of have to be on top of my stuff now. I can't just disappear and escape with my cigarettes anymore. That's definitely a great change. Essentially, my addiction kind of ended up taking precedence over so many of the great things in life, if I'm being honest. Like you kind of end up in this state where you're just so comfortable smoking that it becomes your new normal. You don't feel the extent of the feelings you have due to having this substance in your body all the time. The most difficult aspect of me having BPD has definitely been my mood swings, and it has helped leveling that out, but it has come at the cost of me not knowing how to handle certain emotions anymore. Like, to give an example, it might be something like guilt or shame coming up, and immediate go-to, my brain just craves me smoking another cigarette. And even though it's been weeks since I completely cut off cigarettes, it's quite astounding how much of a difference not being on it makes. I mean, just knowing I've escaped some of my emotions to such a degree that they seem unmanageable now fucking sucks. Like, it really does. And I feel like such a fucking wuss in some ways. Like, I shouldn't have had to escape my emotions like that. I feel that irresponsibility really catching up to me, and especially because I have so much planned for my future. The fact that I'm finally able to say that I'm on track to hit certain goals I didn't think was possible is incredible. Like, addiction really keeps you stuck in this loop of just when can I smoke, when can I get another hit, and you kind of see life just passing you by. And that's kind of a horrible way to live. And it's not to say that it's completely doom. That's not the point. The point is you miss out on certain aspects of life that are simply beautiful. On the topic of being stuck, I feel like cigarettes for me kept me in this loop of always seeking that comfort, that blanket that cigarettes could provide. And it meant I wasn't facing as much difficulty as I could have, for example. I'm a firm believer that you kind of have to face difficulty, and the things you don't want to do is exactly what you need to do. And while cigarettes have been on the top of that list for so long, it was the final thing that I had to confront. And man, like, that's not even going into the health aspect. Like, we all know how bad cigarettes are. Like, I'm not gonna debate that at all. I think the danger lies in cigarettes not seeming that bad. Like, it doesn't impact your life like alcohol does, right? It doesn't influence your mind in that way. It's sort of the smallest buzz you can like find in a substance, And so it keeps you kind of not focused on how impactful it is on your health. I found that I have way more clarity in my mind too, just mentally. But it gets to a point where you kind of don't care. You don't care that you can get lung cancer. You're just so focused on being in that addiction. And for me, it was for a long time like the only stability that I had when my life was completely chaotic. So I do owe like a lot to cigarettes for getting me through like the most difficult parts of my life so far. That's kind of why I began in the first place. Like, it began with pain, and so it has ended in even more pain as I'm facing all these emotions that are catching up, all these financial responsibilities, as I'm confronted with the impact it has had. It's fucking astounding. I can't even describe how much time I've just spent escaping when I could have been out doing stuff. And so getting my time back and pursuing my goals like I am is lovely. It's kind of like you're always going to suffer. And while it seems like an easy fix, it ends up being this completely destructive thing in your life that is so beneath the surface. You don't see it for what it is. You can't see it unless you are on the other side. So if you have someone who's an addict, who's been struggling with it, a lot of the time what you have to say, like, we already know, but it's gonna fall on deaf ears. It has to be the person who's addicted who needs to save themselves in a way. You can only do so much for people, and I think addiction starts with the person confronting what they've been hiding from, or confronting the pain that made them begin with. Like, there's just so many different aspects. I could go on for so long, and I think I've hit the most important ones at this point. Definitely check part 2 out. That is going to be way more personal, way more focused on BPD. Really appreciate you watching, and I really love making this one, actually. Just as like a final words kind of thing. I really had a difficult time creating this video, especially after seeing how successful my last one was. I asked in Buggy's Discord if people had that experience of a video doing super well, and then wanting the next one to be super perfect, and that's apparently a very common experience, So I'm glad to be making this video, and I'm glad to make the next one, so stay around for that. If you're new and you came from my BPD video, expect this one to go up tomorrow for sure. Anyways, it's been Nico. Addiction fucking sucks. I can't say that enough,